Please welcome Chair of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan.
All right. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. Great to be here on the island at a historic location and for this important conference, and listen to the panel before us. The important issues that they raised will be among the many raised today. It's obviously the first time I've arrived at an event like this in a horse-drawn carriage, so that's a little different than after a ferry ride and after a plane ride. But I want to thank the Detroit Regional Chamber for hosting the event and for the invitation to join all of you. I want to thank the Detroit Regional Chamber CEO, Sandy Burraw, and the choice of this year's conference president, my teammate at Bank of America, Matthew Elliott. Matt is our president of Michigan, and he leads the teammates across this great state, more than 1,500 of them who look to help all of you be successful in your business. So I also want to thank the business leaders of Michigan who sponsored this segment and also the broader conference. We appreciate business communities like that around the country and around the world who help keep states economically healthy and work on behalf of Michigan to maintain its economic health. Our job is to help people live their financial lives, whether it's here in Michigan or around the world. In preparing to join you today, I saw the theme of the conference, and you heard it in the last panel on the power of and. So Matt Elliott exercised his prerogative to help shape the conference as the president gets to do, but he also did it for a good reason. The power of and is a great way to think about how the private and public sector join together and, along with other elements of society, can help us work to ensure that capitalism continues to deliver the results that we all need and want. But Matt also knows this is how we run our company. For a public company like ours, many talk about a false choice, and some embrace it about what we're here to do. People on one side or the other will say, we're only here to produce profits and nothing else. People on the other side will say, we're only here to produce purpose and nothing else. But we don't believe companies need to make that false choice. They have to produce for their shareholders and for society. These theories have been debated along many avenues, including from an intellectual basis, from a theoretical basis. The stakeholder capitalism theories of Klaus Schwab versus the shareholder primacy theories of Milton Friedman. In fact, at Bank of America, we believe we have to do both. We have to deliver for our shareholders and for society. The great business writer Jim Collins, who wrote a series of books about companies and what made them great, wrote in 1996 the book Built to Last. He wrote that companies need not make the false choice, need not fall prey to the tyranny of the or, but they need to embrace the genius of the and. And that means a company to be built to last has to deliver both profits and purpose. So that's how we run our company. We use the words responsible growth to identify it. It's enabled Bank of America to be one of the 4 companies in America that earned $15 billion or more for the last 8 years. It shows up again in the first quarter. We had record operating income. And at the same time, in the first quarter, we delivered record purpose. We direct our talent, our innovation, our resources of our company of capitalism to help our clients and partners in the public sector achieve their goals. And we invest in the partners and programs in our local markets to help create economic opportunity and prosperity in underserved communities where the needs can be greatest. But at the core of this is the conviction that capitalism delivers opportunity for our clients, our teammates, our communities, and for our shareholders. So Bank of America's advertising line is, what would you like the power to do? That's what we position our company. We ask that question of clients, teammates, communities, shareholders, and others. And they give us an answer, and then we try to deliver on it. We are here to serve, and if we do that well, we'll be successful because all of you are successful. So the question is, what if you ask the world, what would you like the power to do? That isn't a theoretical question. In fact, in 2015, the United Nations did that. In that year, 190 countries signed the Sustainable Development Goals. Society wants sustainable progress, sustainable development. Development is fair for all. But like all good things, that aspiration costs a lot of money. The SDGs cost $6 trillion per year to implement. So how do you pay for that? Well, a lot of people point to charity. Well, charity and foundations have a lot of money, but it's not enough. There's about $1.25 billion of charity given away a year. $1.25 trillion of charity given away a year. That's only part of the goal. Governments run deficits at the national level and struggle to maintain balance at the state and local levels. And your state is trying to maintain that balance. So they don't have extra money to spend. And in fact, we are witnessing a debate at the federal level of the ability to raise the debt cap for another huge annual operating deficit. And we need to get that through and approved so we can go on with it, go forward in the United States. So who has the money to make the SDGs happen, to do what societies want to do? Companies do, the investors in those companies do, capitalism does. So if we think about our company, we do $360 million a year charitable giving. We did $22 million in Michigan alone over the last 5 years. That is wonderful. It does wonderful work, and our partner NGOs are wonderful beneficiaries of it. But we have $60 billion plus in total expenses. We have a $3.4 trillion balance sheet. We have $4 trillion in investment assets. We have $90 billion in revenue. And we have $8 billion in after-tax income last quarter. So how do we deploy all that to help deliver for society, deliver on the SDGs, deliver sustainable growth? Well, we do that through our $1 trillion financing commitment for the just energy transition over 10 years, of which we're 2 years into and $400 billion into. We do it through the $2 billion a year we spend with minority and women-owned vendors. We do it through the $5 billion we invest in affordable housing every year. We do that through our pay and benefits, starting at $22 an hour for an employee at a starting wage. We do that through hiring 10,000 teammates from low and moderate income neighborhoods over 5 years, and now redoubling that effort to do 10,000 more. We do it by hiring 10,000 veterans over 5 years to help those families have the opportunity to re-enter society and join Bank of America. It's the way we bring our entire resources, our balance sheet, our employment, our spending, all to the task. Now imagine the expense base of all the operating companies represented on this island today, of all the operating companies around the world, of all the balance sheets of all the banks represented, of all the investment houses and their assets under management, all deployed and aligned to deliver for society while delivering on the genius of the and for the shareholders. So we just have to make sure those things get aligned. If you take the talent and innovation that the private sector can bring, you back it with a profit-making, sustainable business model, that represents a lot of money, which eclipses $6 trillion a year easily. So capitalism isn't the only system that can do it. It's really the only hope to accomplish these things. So you see that in Michigan, the great U.S. auto manufacturers who have a long, long history here, and their suppliers are leading not only what they did yesterday, but what they have to do tomorrow with a clean energy transition. They're investing in battery technologies and other parts supplies and things that will change the industry and transform it while it continues to do a great job. The power of the and also helps explain how those companies are engaging their own customers, their employees, their communities, and their elected officials to step up and use a perpetual motion machine of the profit motive, capitalism, to help create this great flywheel of progress. So how does that relate to this conference? Capitalism is enhanced by strong public sector help. Public sector help to incent, enable, and speed progress. This conference is a testimony to those goals. So how does that work when you think about it on a global stage? Let me give you an example. I have the honor of chairing a group called the Sustainable Markets Initiative. It was founded by King Charles III when he was Prince of Wales about 4 years ago. It's 200 plus private sector CEOs joined together, all CEO-led across all industries across the world. We work together to increase the pace of the just energy transition. And we think about policy initiatives which could increase that pace. So it's private sector, CEO-focused, and action-focused. However, the King enabled us to speak to the G7 leaders in 2021 and the G20 leaders later that year. On behalf of the CEOs, I had the honor of speaking to the G7 heads of state. And they opened that by saying something they didn't expect. I said in my opening line, "We do not need your money. We have enough money." They were surprised because they thought there needed to be more money spent by governments to help the just energy transition take place. But then I said, but here's what we need from you. Permitting. Speed projects to completion. Time is money. The faster something gets done, the more it can turn a profit and perpetuate. Use government purchasing power. Buy hydrogen trucks, buy electric school buses. Deliver on mandates. They finally, in the last G20, put a line in about sustainable aviation fuel mandates. Before that, the industry put it on themselves. Reform the multilateral development banks. They have a new leader coming on for the World Bank. A price on carbon, any reasonable official price, so we can have a market developed to help the transition take place. And standard disclosure, so we don't spend all our time trying to count the things, instead do the work to get the things done. So there it was, an outline for the power of public and private partnership working together on the energy transition, and it can apply in lots of areas. There it was, the genius of the and. That is how we speed the flow of capital, how public and private sector work together. And seeing the initiatives in the state, I can see outlines of those ideas taking place. In the Inflation Reduction Act, you can see the incentives being put on the table. And there is a price for carbon capture that is increased to make it more economically viable. We see permitting in the debt agreement that's being debated right now. We see European governments doing the same things. And we see Ajay Banga, the new head of the World Bank. So this is how we can all work together. And working together, we can solve the hard tasks that face the world, including a just transition in the energy sector. But it has to be led by the private sector. And I encourage all of you to do that. And we here at Bank of America are here to help you do so. I've been asked in many settings, and even in Congress, am I a capitalist? And of course the answer was yes. How could you not be a capitalist if your sole, being the CEO of one of the largest banks in the world, and your sole purpose is to transmit capitalism from your different sets of clients? But I understand why they ask the question. There's concerns around capitalism and about opportunity it creates. There's concerns around the profits and spoils are shared fairly. There's concerns of whether we're taking interest in things that aren't core to the profit motive. But at Bank of America, we deal with that by focusing in a straightforward way on the genius of the and. And what I say next is capital provides the money, the creativity, and expertise to solve the needs of society. We enable our customers to participate and drive in that capitalist system. Other systems haven't been successful, and you can look around the world and see that. And when I say it, that this is the right system, it's not some plan for tomorrow. This is what we do. The businesses in this room do it every day. It's how you run your company. It's how you commit your balance sheets, how you deploy your expense base, how do you engage your value chains, and how you drive your net zero commitments. Capitalism to the private sector delivers for customers. It does for shareholders. It does for society. And it does for your teammates. And when capitalism is enhanced by the public sector, it can work even faster and better. That's what we call the genius of the and that's what you call in this conference Michigan and. It's the power of the private sector and the public sector working together. You can do both. It's not a false choice. It simply is capitalism done right. Thank you.
Joining Brian Moynihan on stage, please welcome back President of Bank of America Michigan and Chair of the 2023 Mackinac Policy Conference, Matt Elliott.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Brian, for sharing that information. Also, thank you for taking a plane, a boat, a horse-drawn carriage all the way up here. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, we'll see if I get back at her okay, you'll be okay.
Well, I think you said earlier you're going to have one of our teammates take you down on an e-bike, so that will be interesting.
That'll be interesting.
We'll see how that goes. Well, again, I think you did a great job of framing for the group, how we think of the genius of the and at Bank of America. Before we get into exploring that a little bit more, maybe we should also talk a little bit about what's going on in the banking sector generally. It's frankly a little more interesting than we'd like it to be. So maybe you can give us your point of view on what we see in the sector and what that might mean for our economies.
Well, I think you have to start with the banking industry is going to reflect the economy. And we, along with many other economists in our research team, which is the best in the world, has a mild recession predicted beginning in the third, fourth quarter, and first quarter of next year. And then it ends and goes into recovery. And that's driven by the need to get inflation under control and the fiscal stimulus that stopped in 21 and now the monetary accommodations being pulled out of the economy. So we've had that prediction for a long time. People have ebbed and flowed. But the interesting thing is we don't have high unemployment. We have unemployment getting in the high 4s and maybe to 5, and then coming back down. We have the Fed holding rates to offset that inflation through next year. And so that change in economic structure is affecting our industry because banks reflect the economy. And so it affected us on interest rate as interest rates rose quickly, and that affected some companies. It's affecting on the debate about commercial real estate over time and whether it's going to have issues and other credit issues if you have a recession. But these are all things that we've all managed through. And the bank industry really, since the late 80s and early 90s, it has had strong regulation, the core banking industry. And then the 2007 financial crisis was really about companies that weren't banks. And that was kind of an interesting thing that gets lost. But even since then, even more. So they're well regulated, they're well capitalized, they run well, and I think they'll be fine. Yet you had some failures because of the very unusual circumstances of how those companies operated and how the economy affected them. But I think overall you should all feel very good about the rest of the industry and what my colleagues have done and what we've done in the company.
That's great. And I think that's the same conversation we have with people, but it's interesting how something can take root and you feel like you have to come back at it again and again and again, and time will demonstrate that. All right, well, let's pivot a little bit back towards the power of and some of the themes that have already been raised by the panelists. You know, one of them is culture, right? I talked a little bit about culture sort of at the statewide level, but, you know, we talk a lot about our culture inside the organization. And, you know, I think, you know, this is an organization for everyone's benefit of about 215,000 people around the world. Why don't you talk about responsible growth and how we use that as an alignment tool?
Well, if you think about getting the organization focused on what we needed to do coming out of the period of time from 2003 to 2009, the company made 6 or 7 major acquisitions that had about 300,000 people in the employee base as the company's coming in. And then we ended up with about 300-some-thousand people in the end. You know, and if you mathematically did all the math and added all. And so that's quite a bit changed. That was from the fall of 2003 to January 1st, 2009. Think about that many different companies. So Merrill Lynch, U.S. Trust, Countrywide, MBNA, Fleet Boston, I'm missing something, LaSalle, and so they all came in. So that was kind of interesting. And so as we thought about how we had to shed what we didn't want in the company, we did that. But importantly was how do we have an operating basis go forward, and responsible growth was a way to express the basic concept. You have to grow, no excuses. You have to do it with the right risk. You have to do it on a customer-focused basis. And it has to be sustainable. And this piece, not sustainable in energy sustainability, but sustainable in that it's got to go on, which means you have to be the best place for teammates to work. You have to share your success with communities. And the last part's the most important part, which you have to drive operational excellence to give us the money to do the first 3, everything else. And that's what we've done. So I repeat that. One of the things I read early on in my CEO career, starting 14 years ago now, was how much you have to repeat yourself. And you should rest assured that I've probably said that what I just said thousands and thousands of times, but you have to make sure your teammates see it, and because then that's how you create a culture. So we went from 300,000 people down to 205,000 people at the low point across about 8 or 9 years. And then you had turnover and new hires and all that stuff, and businesses shed and businesses growing and stuff. Yet you had to give people sort of a common purpose, and that's why you have to have a sort of a North Star, and that's what responsible growth has played out for our company. Now, it means something different tomorrow than it did yesterday, because it's not that binding a set of statements, and so you have to make it a little flexible. So we had to lean heavier on growth beginning in the mid 2015, 16, because the responsibility was taken care of and things like that.
Yeah, I can say that as a leader here, it's a lot simpler for me to have that framework to work on, because it's more often than not when we're presented with a challenge, that framework makes it much easier to respond without checking with somebody, because we know where we're headed. That's really valuable. So inside of responsible growth, we talk about the 4th pillar, which is we've got to grow sustainably. And there's a few pieces of that, one of which is we want to be a great place to work. Talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and human capital and how we use that to drive the company forward.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly straightforward thing. We have to have a teammate base which is creative, strives for the success of the company and what they can do for customers and shareholders. And you think about it, a bank is really people, buildings, and computers, and that's what we are. We don't have stores of steel we make into a car. I mean, we basically we're ones and zeros and the minds and the talent to operate. So you want to have the best teammates. You want to free them to think widely about anything and challenge each other. Feel free to speak their mind without fear of negative consequences. One thing we measure deep in our company. You want them to feel they can be themselves. We defined inclusion, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, probably now, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, by saying, that people wanted to hire a consultant. I was head of diversity before I was CO, but I was head of the diversity group, and people wanted us to hire a consultant. I said, let's just ask people what they mean by it. And an individual in the company said, I want to be able to come to work and not have to leave who I am at the door. I said, that's a good enough definition. Let's just work on that. So that's how we describe it. And so we save the money on a consultant. But so it's all the consultants out there won't be happy. But it was really a straightforward statement of what you want, which is somebody has to. The world has to change from representation to I can be who I am in the company. And you think about the LGBTQ+, you think about all the different ethnicities, you think about the intersectionality of different ethnicities, and they have to be themselves to be able to do what they want to do. So we built the company based on, we're all inclusive, diverse in terms of representation, top to bottom. We measure it Cynthia Bowman's out there, and literally we measure it at every level in the company, and every quarterly business review, my teammates that work for me come in and they've let level 1 management, level 2 management, level 3, all the way down to we have 8 levels in the company. We used to have 13, we only have 8 now. And they have to make progress across all the things because we have to represent society. We have to have a diverse group of people. Then inclusion, we test every year. We ask a bunch of questions around how do you feel? It's an on-the-couch question. It's an individual question. And then we have to figure out how then we make that happen. And then we have affinity groups, 180,000 teammates, I think, are in affinity groups. You have huge affinity groups. They operate across the world. It's fabulous to go to London or to Paris and see our disability affinity group operating or something like that. Just fabulous that way. The military group is a strong group. And so you have affinity groups, you have the GDIC, you have the line of business responsibility, you measure it, you don't trust that people are doing it from a representation. And then you test every year, we ask the questions about inclusiveness. So we have a D&I score and we have a employee satisfaction score. And when people come to me for talent planning, I see those scores across the last 3 years and how they fared. So if you have a group of 12 direct reports for somebody, I can see among the direct reports who's lagging, and we put them in a red box if they're lagging on those scores because we want to know why they're faring different from the group. So it takes all that, but it comes down to the simple thing. Our customers look like the world. We have to look like the world. They want us to look like the world. We want to look like the world. We want to have the access to every talent base you can because talent's scarce. How can you do anything else?
Yeah. And nobody wants that red box, by the way. Yeah. Let's expand the lens a little bit.
Well, they don't have it for long.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Let's talk a little bit about expanding the lens on sustainability. You mentioned your role with the Sustainable Markets Initiative. When I've now changed my role inside of B of A, my line of business life, I'm spending a lot more energy around sustainability. And it's interesting how a lot of people come at this from one of two ways, and in very much an or fashion, right? Like you have to divest yourself of your assets, of your investments, and say oil and gas, or on the other hand, you need to not do anything about climate change. Walk us through how that conversation has gone with your fellow members of the SMI, and how you walk the line and stay focused on the business case for all of this.
Well, most of the groups I feel are successful in this have the private sector leading, because this is a question of, it's a business question. You go from here, you want to go to there. And then how do you have all the pieces fall in place? Now, it's a lot of things that people in place and do. And so we've done it. But as we think about it as a participant in the economy, we need to help the transition take place with our clients and customers. If an oil company is making a transition, we got to be there with them to help them make that transition, because we need the energy of society. We need electricity. We need cars to move. We need trucks to move. We need stuff to move. We need cement to come out. Can we improve how it's done? 100%. But right now we need it to survive. And I think, so the idea is, how do you have that but make progress? And that comes down to having plans and having commitments. And so the net zero commitment, by countries, by businesses, by sectors, by states, by cities and towns, covers a large portion of the economy in the world, 95%. So one of the interesting things that Matthew works on for us is, and Paul D'Onofrio and our group, is we've been having these conversations with our clients saying, if you're in the supply chain and the net zero has been made by somebody you supply, that's going to affect your business at some point. So figure out what that all means to you. Because it's probably an opportunity, because if the person has two suppliers they can look at, and one's net zero and one's not, and they're trying to be net zero, they're going to pick the one that's net zero. I'll give you an example. We were in a meeting in January with a group of companies, and one of the companies who was in the logistics business had trucks, electric delivery vehicles. And they said, our problem is the winter snow tires, as we call them, they call them winter tires in Europe, are not net zero, so the whole truck can't be net zero. Believe me, they're going to find a supplier of net zero winter tires. The summer tires are fine, believe it or not. It was just the winter. So I think the impact on our clients is as this goes through the system. And so the CEOs understand that. They made commitments and they're trying to live up to them, and they're trying to get their supply chains organized. And so we're trying to keep the focus away from the scope 3, because that's just hard to measure and manage. Scope 1, 2, what I do in our company to consume, and then what I have more direct control over. So in our scope 3, we disclose our scope 3, our controllable scope 3, for example, our employees flying. We can make a choice. Do they fly or not? And then do we offset that with sustainable aviation fuel purchase and stuff like that? We can make a choice. There are other things. We finance a car. The person drives it. How many miles they drive it? We don't have a lot of control over that. And so we're trying to say focus on scope 1, 2, focus on what we control, focus on the business requirements. Then we talk to our customers saying, hey, the big companies have lots of staff doing this, but mid-sized companies may not know, and they may be thinking this isn't a big deal. And it's not going to be a big deal from some right-wrong basis. It's going to be a big deal to them from just a business system, because at some point they're going to get to knock on the door and say, are you net zero or not? And if not, I may have to rebid your contract. And you're saying, just figure it out. And it's work. It takes time. It's effort to understand all the dynamics of it. But we've had 20,000 conversations, and they've all come back with opportunities for clients to do better. Some of our companies are so far ahead of us and everybody else that the conversation is,
we're learning from them.
But many of them are saying, okay, explain this to me. What's going to happen? Because the ebbs and flows of it in the political environment and other environments have polluted it down to its simplest core, which is we need energy for everybody. We need it from all sources. We need it to work for you. And everybody's got to make this work, because no one industry, no one company, no one enterprise, no one government can make it happen. And that then will affect all of us.
Yep, exactly. Well, there's a lot of an and in all those discussions, and having been a part of a lot of them, and my team leads all those, it's very gratifying to have them. Let's talk a little bit about...
And that's where I think that this concept of the enablement of the public sector, there are two or three ways the public sector can do it. One, they can regulate it. The problem with that is it has outcomes that nobody can figure out. The better answer is how they incent it, and then how they hold people accountable for making a progress. And I think you've seen some of the initiatives, so think about the Inflation Reduction Act. There's huge incentives built into it. But every state has to sit there and say, how do I get the companies to do that work here? And then you can grow off it. So there's tremendous opportunity. But the war's already being fought, so you have to be ready to go. And a lot of it's going to come down to permitting, the ability to build a facility. Will you help train the employees? It's going to have nothing to do with the technology. That question's come down to the basics of what good business climates are like. And as I travel around and live, one state, work in another state, travel to other states, you see the states that are good at this are just hitting it. And so some of the states aren't so good. I keep saying, you're just missing an opportunity here. And your clients, your people who are paying tax in your state are going to start to shift their activities outside the state because they have to, because they can get the opportunity. So, and that's the power of the and of the apply to public sector and private sector in this. And so there's just tremendous opportunity. And especially in this state with the heritage that it has, it's just really tremendous.
And I think a lot of that goes back to the alignment question that we've all been talking about, and we're hoping to come out of the weekend, or out of the week, excuse me, with a few more lines that we can line up on. One of the cool things about working at Bank of America is I work for a place that's got a global perspective. It's an interesting seat in the press box, and nobody has a better view of the game tape than this guy. When you think about and outcomes, and you travel around the world and you see an awful lot of opportunities in business evolution, what are some examples of some and outcomes, especially ones that are the public-private partnerships that you've referenced earlier that you think might be models for us here?
So take hydrogen, which there's a lot of debate about how it works and what it works and how effective it will be and how costly it will be. But where you're seeing some and outcomes is you're seeing, in the example I used in the UK, was use your purchase power because it can work. Wind-powered hydrogen building can work because the engines can work. It isn't a question. But it can work if somebody buys enough to get it started. Yep. And so the commitments by governments to the user purchase power help. And so in England, that's taken place where they have the wind energy and they're trying to build the hydrogen facilities and they're coming on the ground and then they build them. So you see, but it takes a government to kick off the purchase because they have a lot of vehicles that they can convert fast with one decision. The problem is if you have 15 companies, you have 15 decisions, and then you have 15 more, and so it's hard. And so, school buses are another example. When, you can convert a fleet of school buses, and there are places that are doing it faster than you can convert the cars, because that's an individual purchase decision. The fleet's 12, 13, 14 years old. The turn on a new car is not that fast. If you go and say, I'm going to give you a free school bus, you can do it. So governments can, and that's more powerful than other things because that creates the market for the vehicles and stuff. And so I think, that's what you're trying to get governments to do. That's a real example. And so these, every day, because of the stuff that I've looked at, I get tremendous news feeds coming at me on environmental stuff because once you start into the algorithms later. And
thank you for the downstreams on those.
I pull all those articles and I send them out to the team. And then our team puts our deals that we've done and deals that were done outside us and stuff. Look, it's just so much going on. And the government has a role in all those different pieces, sometimes purchase, sometimes enabler. In the Global South, you see it that we're doing a deal with the MDBs. We do deals with the MDBs where they're guaranteed debt because it's hard to lend in some of these countries that enable us to deploy solar installations and things that we couldn't otherwise do. Again, so that's how they use that. That's using the multilateral development bank to take the currency risk off the table, political risk, frankly, off the table. We just did a deal across the Caribbean with a private company to bring, who's a power company, to bring solar and help there. And that again was enabled by the Caribbean looking at it on a holistic basis, not just one small island at a time, because none of them are big enough to afford much, but you look at a holistic basis. So the governments have all these roles, and I've been with the G7, been with the G20, we're talking to them all the time, and the governments around the world, and the COPs beginning in Glasgow, now through Sharm el-Sheikh and coming up to UAE. There's been a lot of engagement in the private sector with the public sector about how do you do enablement. And literally, it starts with this question, well, you guys need to do more financing. And saying, we can't finance if the clients don't have the demand, so create the demand cycle. And sustainable aviation fuels is interesting that way. My first meeting with a group of CEOs that became the SMI, I sat in a room in Clarence House and listened to all of it go on and said, this is the craziest stuff I ever heard of. It's just sustainable aviation fuels. And then I learned about it. A guy named John Holland Kay that runs Heathrow Airport. Engines can do them now, up to 50%. No retooling at all. Today, our planes use sustainable aviation fuel where we can get it, and where we can't, we buy the equivalent and somebody else goes in somebody else's plane. And then the industry put a 30% mandate on themselves, finally. They got tired of waiting for the government. So now you have 100 billion gallons of jet fuel. You need $30 billion of capacity. And there's about 10 or 15 million gallons of capacity built today. Think about that difference. And that's the kind of stuff that you see. The mandate, they did it through the UN to make the mandate so it could cover all the industry. But we asked at the G7, the G20, and 3 other times, just put it in the communique that we're going to mandate that, and the market will develop. And that's what governments can do. So even at the state level, you can make those kinds of mandates that, we want X, Y. You don't have to be over your skis. Just a little bit helps.
And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that the government's not walking in and establishing a market. It's just the beginning of the demand signal, and let capitalism do its job from there.
Yep.
Okay, well, we all have one job at the end of every session here, Brian, and one is that we're going to make one suggestion around something that you think will help drive the power of and everybody's businesses here. One micro action that we would say, right? And then what's one metric that, as a manager or a leader, you would pay attention to or suggest we would pay attention to help guide our progress?
So on the first question, this isn't a micro action. What we need everybody to do is to help this debt ceiling deal get passed. There's a deal that's worked out between both parties. We need to, as a business community, say we need to do it because the alternative is not very pretty. And so they've spent a lot of time to negotiate something. We need to help push that through. So that's a micro action. That doesn't help the power of the and, but it will help the next few weeks not being
Prevents a really big or.
I think, look, I think, I'll come at it from the private sector standpoint. I think we have to be as discreet and clear with the government sector about what we need. Is it permitting, and what do we mean by that? Is it market, whatever it is. And I think the problem is, over many years now, it gets talked about in generalities and never gets reduced to things. So the micro thing would be to write down one thing that you need that's very specific. Is it training? Is it this? And then say, this is what we want you to do. And then they can try to find the capability and money or the power to do it. I think we end up at too high level. And I talk about high level concepts, but you try to take them down. I mean, if everybody bought for their own flights and the flights of all employees at SAF, you would create a market. That is absolutely doable by you today, whether you just fly private or public. It's absolutely doable. All you have to do is research it. We'll help you research it, and you can do that. And that then starts a market. So there's micro things you can do, but I think from the public sector, private sector, I think it really is, what do we need specifically for your company to make it happen? And don't be general, because the general has it. In our company, we've been clear with them what we need, and it's the type of things I mentioned. On a metric, I think if you think about it from the state level and what you're trying to do, it really comes down to, are you attracting people? If you have more people, everything takes care of itself. More taxes. If your population is stable or down, that's a tough place to be. And we can look across our country and see this, and we can look across the world and see this. It's hard to have enthusiasm if your people are coming down. So you need more people, and you need to have the conditions that create that. And I think at the national level, that's solving the immigration question potentially. The state level, it's how you make yourself attractive from the business community. And if we just measure that, if your population's going up, most everything else will take care of itself. It's because what you're doing has to be attractive enough for people to come live there. If your college students stay here and they keep their degrees and they go to work, you pick the thing. More people, I think, is the one metric that says you've won in the global competition for where people want to be. And if you win that, then life gets easier.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you for that advice. Sounds like grow no excuses. That's what we're going to go do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.